The human life of the borough or area of any town or city, or it's built up and through the content of individual lives, obviously. So it's very important. Very important. So anyway, that's what I think. I'm Bob Saunders. I left school at 15 and a half and got my first job with the Gaslight and Coke Company. My mother, because we were, relatively hard up, as it were, and mother got a job because she was a skilled machinist. She got a job as an outworker for a factory in East Ham, and if I remember rightly, she used to sew shirts. Yes, she would have to travel all the way to East Ham from Barking by bus and train, taking back completed garments and bringing home all the pieces that were to be made up. So as you can see, all the expenses was down to the worker. So but it probably scraped in a few shillings, I mean, what people did in those days was extraordinary, really. I worked at the now former Beckton Gas Works, which in its time was said to be the largest gas works in the world. I worked in the accountants department, and as in any business, there were several parts of the office because it was a very large concern. Obviously a tremendous amount of goods had to be brought in for maintenance, and there was so there were very big stores of innumerable things to keep the works going. And there was obviously a very big wages department because there were thousands of men employed, and in those days wages were paid every week, so thousands of pounds of cash would come to the offices, and those on the wages department would have to prepare the wage in notes and change silver and copper, and all the men in the works were paid by cash, and the money was given to them in a little round metal pot, and they would queue up at the windows of the offices on a Friday to collect their money. But of course, people on salaries, I'm not sure. Yes, I think it was even the same for them. I don't think we had bank accounts in those days. But that was a very busy section to work on a Friday. And of course it all had to be agreed to the penny. A colossal amount of work, really. So there are all sorts of stores records to be kept. There were big ledgers for all the materials that were brought in, including timber and metal parts and nuts and bolts and that sort of thing. So all needed a lot of clerical work. Items on the purchasing side being recorded, and then on the issue side you had to have a method of recording all the stocks that went out. So it was, and then there was the secret of secrets, known as the private ledger. Oh dear, oh Lord. So, but anyway, it was a very, very big department. Needed obviously typists and all that sort of thing. So I had several years working there.
Before I forget, could we find out what was the secret of secrets, the private ledger?
Oh, well, probably things like all the top salaries and that sort of thing, I would think. Yeah, it sounded marvellous. I have mentioned that I worked in the accountants department at Beckton Gas Works, which is where I met Beryl, who worked in the medical records department. But equally, Beryl's father had worked on the physical side of gas making. He works on maintaining the boilers, which were used in actually creating the gas, and he would have to, for cleaning purposes, I imagine, he would have to work inside these awful, metal retorts, and it affected his lungs so badly he ended up in bed at home with having to wear a mask and always have an oxygen cylinder by his bed. But sadly, at a very young age, perhaps in the late 30s or perhaps that sort of age, but sadly he died. Also, his wife, Beryl's mother, she was an employee of the Gaslighting Coke Company, but she worked in the offices as I in Ilford, so but it did keep the household going. So that was me and Beryl and Beryl's brother-in-law Roy. He worked on the railway part of the industry there. When I was working in the accountants department, it was a very, very large office, and it used to have a corridor running along one side with a low wall, and there was many offices all round, but this was a main sort of traffic corridor, and of course a certain Miss Robinson would take herself along to the cloakroom and one thing and another, and I used to creep out after her, and we would somehow manage to disappear into the strong room, and we've always got records to look up, but I then later on I must have overdone it a bit, I think, and I got ticked off that I shouldn't really be doing it. But anyway, as I said, or I have said, I eventually, through our friendship, it got to the point where we decided to get married, and dear old Beryl's mother, Mrs. Biddell, bless her, she managed, even though it was several years after the war, of course, but things were still very short. To get a cake was very difficult, and but dear old Mum invited all the aunts and uncles, her mother's own relations, and my mum and dad and my aunts and uncles, to the wedding, and of course we couldn't accept a reception, a professional reception. We had it in Beryl's mum's front room. I think we all squeezed in there, squeezed in all the chairs and tables and bits, and then in those days, of course, nobody had a car. So after the reception, me and Mum caught a bus, and we caught a bus along this road up to Billericay, where a friend of ours had a small property called Why Worry. It was a wooden framed bungalow, and we had a week's honeymoon on the edge of Northsea Wood. It was all very exciting. Lovely, happy days. And I was lucky enough that my mother, or my parents, allowed me to have a room. They'd got a 4-bedroomed house, and they gave us their largest bedroom as a as a a bedroom and sitting room and what you call a bed sit, I suppose, today. So we lived quite happily in our one room in the early years. The gas company itself had what was known as a gas holder in a very large playing field in East Ham. And so there was a sports facility there, and we used to, I think it was once a week, used to, in the summer evenings, we would cycle to East Ham to this sports facility and play tennis and that sort of thing. And Beryl, at that time, was a medical secretary, which is a bit unusual, but being a large specialist industrial concern where men, because of the nature of the work and the use of coal in the making of gas, they would contract a form of cancer. And of course there was always a need for them to have medical attention, so there was always a medical record kept of them. So in today's world, where we talk of health and safety, in those days that was virtually non-existent. Well, certainly in its present form, but there was a recognition, even in those far-off days, that men were in need of medical attention. Oh, well, there was a thing in the gas company that the way to progress, this was all new in those days, the way to progress was to get qualifications of some sorts. So I decided I would go to evening classes, which I did, and well, for several years, which is where I've sat and passed the exams for the London Chamber of Commerce in the with the national certificate, it was called. So, but it did keep the household going. But of course, the gas works has all disappeared now. It's all been knocked down and built over. So, taking it all round, there was quite a connection with the gas company in those days. But it's all changed now. There's no such thing as the Gaslight and Coke Company. Great ramifications have taken place with ownership and so on. But it gave a number of us a good start in life, really. So that's how the story began. Yeah, happy days. Life is a game of chance.